Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a pretty dramatic maelstrom of recent events, a critical flashpoint, really, centered around military actions involving Israel and Iran, and now, significantly, the United States is directly engaged. This deep dive is all about understanding the sequence, the actions and reactions that unfolded, and getting the significant details of what happened and maybe what it means. We've gathered info that lays out the timeline, the impact.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here isn't just how quickly it all escalated, but also how the different players involved framed their actions, their intentions. It's quite telling. We'll walk you through the U.S. strikes on what were described as key Iranian nuclear facilities, and then, of course, Iran's response, which included the first combat use of a particular missile. And we'll look at the international reactions, too, which were, well, varied.
Right. Our mission here is to give you a clear, detailed picture of these critical moments, help you grasp the key facts without getting lost in all the noise and spin. This isn't just a timeline. It feels more like a high-stakes chess match playing out, Each move forcing a counter-move. And the U.S. just made a very bold opening. So let's set the scene. The night of June 22nd, the United States directly enters the simmering military conflict between Israel and Iran. U.S. forces carried out strikes on key Iranian nuclear sites. What was the scope here?
Well, specifically, 3 nuclear sites were hit: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. U.S. President Trump stated that Fordow, the underground enrichment plant, received a full set of bombs. And it wasn't entirely out of the blue, was it? There was a lead-up.
That's right. These strikes came after an earlier statement from U.S. President Trump back on June 19th. He'd indicated a decision on entering the conflict would be made in the next 2 weeks, and offered Tehran what he framed as a final chance for negotiations on its nuclear program. So a public signal is definitely sent.
Absolutely. A very clear signal. And the how of these strikes is just as significant as the why. The operation involved B-2 stealth bombers. These had already been moved towards the Middle East before the strikes happened. And these aren't just any bombers. They can carry the GBU-57 MOP massive ordnance penetrator, the MOP, bunker busters. Reports confirmed B-2s were used specifically for Fordow, dropped 6 of these MOPs, each one weighing, get this, 15 tons.
15 tons, wow. That's immense. Hard to even picture. And it wasn't just the B-2s at Fordow, right? It was a broader strategy.
Correct. For the other sites, Isfahan and Natanz, the approach was different. Around 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched, apparently from submarines. So you see this multi-pronged attack, different assets for different targets.
And the MOP bomb you mentioned, the GBU-57 MOP, that's the big one.
It is. It's currently the largest non-nuclear bomb in the U.S. arsenal, maybe the world. Weighs about 13.6 tons, carries around 2,700 kilograms explosives. It was developed precisely for this kind of target. Heavily protected, deeply buried facilities, potentially holding WMDs. Its key feature is penetration. It can go down about 61 meters, that's roughly 200 feet, before detonating. And here's a crucial point. This operation marked the first confirmed combat use of the MOP bomb, ever.
First combat use. So a weapon designed for these extreme scenarios finally deployed. That sends a message in itself, doesn't it? Especially to other nations with similar facilities. It sort of changes the calculus. These attacks happened around 2:30 a.m. local time in Iran, and Washington had let Israel know beforehand.
Yes, coordination was evident. Following the bombing runs, U.S. President Trump spoke directly with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Later, U.S. President Trump addressed the American public. He described the attack as an impressive military success. Strong words.
He also asserted that Iran's key enrichment facilities were, quote, entirely and completely destroyed. And he laid out the objective pretty clearly. Eliminate Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and remove the nuclear threat posed by, in his words, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world.
He framed it historically, too, referencing past chants of death to America, death to Israel. And he stated that Iranian actions had led to the deaths of over 1,000 Americans and hundreds of thousands more across the Middle East and globally. He declared very firmly that such actions wouldn't continue. So positioning the strikes as a decisive response to long-standing issues.
And he included a warning, didn't he, about what might come next?
He did. A very direct warning. If Iran didn't agree to peace immediately, he said, additional strikes would follow, even more severe ones. It's a clear message of deterrence. Or maybe coercion, depending on how you see it.
But there was also another message sent, more quietly.
Yes, that's an interesting wrinkle. The U.S. administration apparently passed a message to Iran, using Arab states as intermediaries, clarifying that these strikes were meant as a singular event, not the beginning of a wider war aiming for regime change. So you have this dual track, the very loud public warning of overwhelming force, and a quieter back-channel message trying to contain the fallout, a bit of a tightrope walk.
Right, trying to deter but maybe not provoke an all-out regional war. Still, a massive strike like that, you expect a response. And it came pretty quickly. Around 7:37 a.m. Moscow time, the Israeli Defense Forces detected the first incoming rockets from Iran.
That's right. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, announced they had launched 40 rockets, both solid and liquid-fueled types. They called it the 20th wave of Operation True Promise 3. And this response was significant because it marked the first-ever combat use of their multi-charge ballistic missile, the Kaibar.
The Kaibar. What do we know about that missile?
It's described as a medium-range, solid propellant ballistic missile. Range is approximately 2,000 kilometers, about 1,200 miles. It can carry a substantial warhead, up to 1,500 kilograms. It apparently uses a guidance system for better accuracy. And, importantly, it can be launched from central Iran. That's significant because those areas might be less intensely monitored by Israeli air defenses compared to, say, Western Iran. So, launching this Kaibar missile is Iran demonstrating a new, arguably more sophisticated retaliatory capability.
And they specified their targets.
Yes, the IRGC named Ben Gurion Airport, the Israeli Biological Research Center, and various command centers as targets. The impacts were fairly widespread. Rockets or debris landed in about 10 locations, including the Carmel Mountains in the northwest, the city of Haifa, and significantly, the greater Tel Aviv area, which is densely populated.
And there were casualties from this.
Yes. Initial reports from medical services indicated 16 people sustained injuries. It's always crucial to remember the human cost amidst these strategic moves.
Definitely. Now, Iran also had something to say about the effectiveness of the U.S. strikes on their facilities, didn't they?
They did. A very direct counter-narrative. Iran claimed that the targeted facilities Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan had actually been evacuated some time ago. They stated that enriched uranium stockpiles had already been removed from these centers well in advance. Thus, they argued, there was no risk of a radiation leak from the strikes. And crucially, they added that Iran had no intention of stopping its nuclear development program.
So, a complete contradiction. The U.S. claims entirely and completely destroyed enrichment capacity. Iran claims evacuated facilities, no material lost, program continues. That makes judging the real impact very difficult, doesn't it?
Extremely difficult from the outside. It becomes a battle of narratives alongside the actual military actions.
Okay, so let's turn to the international stage. How did the world react to this sharp escalation?
Well, reactions poured in pretty quickly, and they were quite varied, as you'd expect. Iran's foreign minister, for instance, strongly condemned the U.S. actions. He stated the U.S. violated the UN Charter and international law by attacking what Iran maintains are peaceful nuclear facilities. He called the assault outrageous, warned of far-reaching consequences, and asserted Iran's right to self-defense using all possible measures.
And didn't he also connect this to earlier events?
Yes, he also claimed the U.S. had participated in planning Israel's initial attack on Iran. So, trying to frame the U.S. strikes not just as an intervention, but as part of a longer, coordinated campaign against Iran.
What about the UN?
The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, weighed in. He characterized the U.S. bombing as a dangerous escalation, said it posed a direct threat to peace and security. He warned the conflict could spiral rapidly out of control, potentially catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, the world. His message was clear. No military solution. Diplomacy is the only way forward, a plea for de-escalation.
And Israel's reaction, given the prior coordination?
Unsurprisingly, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly thanked U.S. President Trump for the strikes. He referenced his own earlier promises that these facilities would be destroyed, stating that promise had now been fulfilled. He emphasized the full coordination with the Israeli army and described his phone call with U.S. President Trump right after the strikes as very warm and touching. Apparently, U.S. President Trump congratulated Netanyahu, the Israeli army, and the Israeli people, so portraying it as a shared success, the strengthening of the alliance.
Meanwhile, back in the U.S., was there consensus?
Not entirely. There was pushback, particularly from the legislative branch. The Senate Minority Leader demanded that U.S. President Trump explain to Congress and the American public the strategy behind the strikes. How would this decision impact U.S. security in the long run? He argued strongly that no president has the right to unilaterally involve the country in something like war without a clear strategy, and he voiced concern that the risk of a full-scale, prolonged conflict had just jumped significantly. So, definite domestic questions being raised.
Interesting. Any other key international responses?
Yes. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, announced an emergency meeting of its governing board. That signals serious international concern about the implications, especially for nuclear non-proliferation agreements and monitoring efforts. And on a practical safety note, Saudi Arabia's Nuclear Regulatory Agency reported monitoring radiation levels in the Persian Gulf countries. They stated they found no increase following the U.S. strikes, which aligns somewhat with Iran's claim about moving material, or at least suggests no immediate, widespread radiological fallout.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what does it all mean right now? This rapid-fire sequence, U.S. strikes, Iran's retaliatory launch, these strong statements from all sides. It highlights just how volatile things are. It really leaves us with some critical questions, doesn't it? About where this goes next, how it might reshape things globally.
It absolutely does. And maybe the key question to ponder is this. You have a conflict where both sides claim precision, claim strategic wins, yet offer completely different versions of events. What are the real long-term consequences going to be for stability in that already fragile region? And thinking more broadly, how does the first combat use of a weapon like the MOP potentially alter the strategic thinking of other nations with similar underground programs? What does deterrence look like now?
A lot to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this breakdown helped give you a clearer understanding of these complex and fast-moving events. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.